So, please give it up for Lance Ray Christensen.
This is such an awesome crowd. I apologize it took us so long to get here today. I live in Wheatland. Anybody know where Wheatland is? Small town in Yuba County, one of the original 27 counties in California, with my 5 kids on 11 acres and a small farm. Last week we had 13 chickens, but I found the raccoons this last week, and we're now down to 10. Heartbreaking. My 5 kids haven't figured that out yet, so I'll save that for next week. I spread the heartbreak out a little bit. But I love California, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second, but I love that all of you are here. I want to thank James. I got a chance with he and Christy a couple months back where we had a conversation about how important it is for us to stand up and to save this state. And you can't save the state if you let the kids wander in obscurity, which we're doing right now. And what's happening to our kids is completely abysmal. And how many YouTube videos have I watched of Christy? You know, we all have. These are amazing. She's an amazing advocate and passionate for these kids and for Santa Barbara and California. I want to also thank, too, my really good dear friend, Mike Stoker. I've known Mike for 20 years now. When I worked for Tom McClintock years ago up at the Capitol, Mike was his district director down here. And I've spent many hours in Mike's home and knocking doors for him when I ran for the state senate years ago. I'm thrilled to endorse Mike for his assembly seat. He's going to win. And to his wife, Debbie, she's wonderful. And she's also stepping up for these kids in the community college. We need to support these guys. It's one thing to talk about K through 12, which I'll spend a few minutes talking about tonight. But once we send them off to the world in community college, we have to have a program that actually works for them and for us as a community. So I endorse her as well tonight. Okay, so I'm going to throw a few numbers at you tonight. I don't want you to fall asleep, but I want you to think about these things. $128.6 billion. That is the K through 12 education budget for this year. Last year was just a little bit less. So if you take the 2 years combined, last year and this year, that's $250 billion with a T that we're spending in California on our education system. In the state of California, we have 5.9 million kids in the public school system. The public school system in California is 58 counties, boards of education. We have a few people representing or running for offices there. We have 944 school districts in the state. So you're ready for those district positions as well. We have 319,000 public school teachers and 10,000 public schools. It's a lot to take care of in California. But if you take that $128.6 billion, you divide it out between the 5.9, it comes to somewhere around $22,893. That's what we're going to spend this year per pupil on education, K through 12. $23,000 per pupil. Ask yourself if your child or grandchild or neighbor or friend in the K through 12 system is getting a $23,000 a year education. They're not. And if you were to take that and put that in the private school industry, that would be an impressive private school. But right now, our kids are doomed based upon their zip code, right? They go to a school that's assigned to them randomly based upon where they work, and not because of what parents choose mostly. Now, there are many of you and others who have the resources to go out and to buy a private school education. I think that's wonderful. But we have a lot of kids in the state that don't have that opportunity. So a few more numbers. Christy said also at the beginning, we rank 50th in literacy in the entire country. 50th, not 49th, not 48th. And years ago, we used to say, thank God for Mississippi, right? Guess what? They are far superior than we are in educating our kids on how to read. In fact, they've advanced the furthest out of all 50 states. They're the only state in the last 2 years that's actually increased their literacy rates out of all 50 states. Ironically enough, Mississippi is one of the 23, 24, 25 states now that we're not allowed to travel to thanks to the governor. So we can't even go to Mississippi and ask them what they're doing right so that we can understand how to implement it here. Think of how backwards this state is. It doesn't make any sense, does it? But why is it like this? Again, I'm a father of 5 kids. Last year, I had a kindergartner, a 3rd grader, a 4th grader, a 9th grader, and a 12th grader. So I had a K through 12 education system at home. And I'll tell you, we saw from A to Z the problems and challenges of our public school system. And all 5 of my kids have gone through the public school system. My oldest graduated last year. He left our home. He's spending 2 years in Argentina for an LDS mission. He left on Tuesday. But we watched the different challenges that these kids faced as they were locked out of the classrooms for over 2 years for a disease that didn't impact the young people. And what do we have? Well, the New York Times finally has come to the realization that we have years of learning loss for these kids. Not only learning loss, but if you look at suicide rates, anxiety, depression, it's a tremendous travesty, the burden that we put on these kids, that they have often had to bear alone, behind a screen, and sometimes with a mask on. I have a daughter who's in 4th grade this year. She's she has a challenging speech impediment. Try doing speech with a mask on over Zoom. It doesn't happen. So she's so glad to be back in the classroom this year. My wife homeschooled her 3 youngest for the last 2 years. It was a huge blessing. But not a lot of people can do that. We get it. And so one of the things I did, I'll give you my resume really quick. So father of 5, again, I spent 17 years in and out of the legislature. I worked for 2 years at Reason Foundation, not far from here. Started in Santa Barbara, as a matter of fact, over 45 years ago. Worked with them on pension reform issues. It's a really sexy and fun topic. I wrote a book about it. It's a complete, it'll put you to sleep. I did that for a while, but I came back to the legislature. I worked for a man by the name of John Morlock. I don't know if you recognize that name, from Orange County. John Morlock predicted the bankruptcy of Orange County in 1994. He's the only CPA in the legislature at the time, and he said, listen, we have a problem. He was vice chair of the Committee on Education Funding. So all the money that came through the legislature, the billions and billions of dollars, I would say the 6 years we were in the legislature, probably close to $600 billion came through. And what I saw was not a lot of well-spent money, well-accounted for money. There was a lot of waste. But John Morlock and I were chatting. We thought, we've got to do something. We have to provide a way that some of this money can go to kids that need it. So we wrote a bill, SB 1344. The bill would create an education savings account. This education savings account would take the money from the general fund and would allow these kids to take it to any school of their choice. It was so popular by the CTA that it got killed in the education committee for the first time. But it didn't stop us. So this last year, we realized we have an opportunity. A lot of kids have been locked out of our schools, so we and several other people introduced the School Choice Initiative. Many of you probably saw it. Create an education savings account. Unfortunately, it costs a lot of money to put something on the ballot. We didn't get it on the ballot for this year, but we worked hard to make it right. Well, guess what? I was one of the principal drafters of that, because I really believe that that we shouldn't be funding schools, and we should be funding students.
Thank you.
And we got to figure out how to do that. So when doing that, when we couldn't get on the ballot, I thought, what can we do? Who's going to run for the state's top education position? So I called a lot of friends, people that you may recognize, and I said, are you going to run and step up to the plate? Nobody would. So after a conversation with my wife, begrudgingly, she said, yes, let's do it. You had the same conversation, I'm sure. So I threw my hat in the ring, but it was literally 2 days before the filing happened. And in California, we have some weird arcane laws that if you don't file your ballot statement 3 weeks out or before you file for the office, you don't get on the ballot in terms of your statement. So I put it on. We had very little fundraising. We made it through the primary. Out of 7 candidates, I came in second. You can clap. It's all right. But not only that, the opponent spent $4 million against my $60,000. So it's not a lot of money that we need, but we need resources, right? The state is huge. 22 million voters. Out of that 22 million, only 7.3 voted in the entire election. Out of that 7.3, only 6.3 voted in my election. So almost a quarter of the people eligible to vote voted. We've got a lot of people we just have to persuade to show up to the polls to vote. If they do, I win. It's very simple. It's not a complex thing, and this is not a partisan thing. In fact, the Superintendent of Public Instruction is the only office, constitutional office, out of the 8, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, on down. It's the only one that is nonpartisan. And it's been around since the beginning of the state, since 1849. So there's an opportunity for us to come in and have a parent represent other parents at the top.
Yeah.
It's time for us to add parents back in the education equation. So in the primary, Tony Thurman got 45.9% of the vote. Split out between the rest of us, I got 12%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but guess what? 54% of the people decided they didn't like him. Now, is that going to carry over to November? I hope so. Polling in the past, we haven't been able to do a lot of polling in our race specifically, but what we have shown is that Tony Thurman trails 10 points behind Gavin Newsom in every poll that's been done. 10 points. Right now, Gavin's at 52%. It brings him at about 42. So that's good. We also know, too, that parents are angry, so they're running for school board. We have a lot of you here tonight. The blessing of having people run for school board is that that's a lot of foot soldiers to be out knocking on doors. You walk to win in local school board races. You get to know your community. I can't knock on 22 million doors, and I'm not going to. I'm going to come and talk to groups like this and work strategically and thoughtfully to support those candidates that are out there so we can win across the state. We have 2,500 open school board seats this year. 2,500. And a lot of them being filled or going to be filled by parents just like you, dedicated to fixing our education system. So if elected, what would I do? I do 3 things. 1, the first person I would hire would be a chief parent advocate in the Department of Education. That person would be my number 1 consultant when we would talk about everything that impacts parents and their kids' education. How are we dealing with curriculum? How are we dealing with IEPs or discipline? Attendance. How are we holding schools accountable that mistreat our children? That would be number 1. Number 2 is we'd have a kids first audit at the Department of Education. Right now, the Department of Education is led by the Superintendent of Public Instruction, who's the executive director. The superintendent also sits as an ex officio voting member of the Board of Education, which establishes all of our curriculum. So the superintendent sits on a lot of important things. He also sits on, or she, we've had women in the past too, sits on the Commission for Teacher Credentialing. We have a problem with teachers right now in the state. They're leaving in droves. They don't want to come back, and for lots of different reasons. But he also sits as a board member on the community college districts, on the CSUs, and as a regent for the UC system. Can you imagine having a parent advocate in all of those areas for these kids? We haven't had that for generations. So that would be number 2. Do a kids first audit of the Department of Education, $175 million, 2,400 bureaucrats in Sacramento telling you what you can and can't do with your money. Let's fix that. And number 3, I think it's time for a real come to Jesus moment about our education system. I think it would be important to invite all of the 58 county boards of education and their superintendents, you're invited, as well as the 944 school district superintendents and their trustees to Sacramento. And let's sit around a table, let's get a big room and say, what does education look like in the 21st century in California? Because what we have right now is a 19th century Prussian system where we put kids in a warehouse on a conveyor belt, hit start, and hope that they come out all right on the other end. And it's a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't work anymore in the 21st century economy. We know that. So how can we fix it? How can we take the thousands and tens of thousands of pages of education code and of regulations and make it work for our kids, make it work for our families? How can we take the whole dynamic and flip it on its head so we actually educate our kids? I'm here for my 5 kids. They're 7th generation Californians. California is in their blood, just like it's in all of your blood. We're not leaving. We're going to take the state back. We're going to do it through the schools. We're going to make sure that we also work through these different offices. We're going to take it back through the legislature with Mike when he's up there. We're going to have conversations to make sure that our kids are getting the best education the world has to offer as they did generations ago. So I look forward to your support. I'm happy to answer any questions if Christy wants. And thank you for coming tonight.